A society is never exposed by what it celebrates, but by what it allows. What happened here didn't explode overnight. It was approved quietly, processed casually, and justified efficiently, right in front of people who now swear they're shocked. That's the part no one wants to sit with, because outrage feels righteous after the damage, but responsibility feels uncomfortable before it. Here's a fact that doesn't get enough attention. Most public scandals aren't revealed by investigation or bravery. They surface because the cost of silence finally becomes higher than the cost of speaking. Until that moment, systems don't correct themselves. They wait, they watch, they calculate. And while they're doing math, someone else is paying the price. What makes this situation unsettling isn't just what was done. It's how many people signed off on it without ever signing their names. Policies were followed, procedures were respected, heads nodded, papers moved. Everyone stayed professional, which in many rooms is just a polite word for emotionally unavailable. Somehow it was perfectly acceptable to say, "This is fine," while everything very clearly was not. Now the community is outraged, demanding answers, drawing lines in the sand like they just arrived. Suddenly, memory improves. Voices get louder, statements get longer. Funny how clarity shows up only after consequences bring a microphone. It's like watching people discover a fire alarm after the building smells like smoke. And yes, there's a strange humor in it, because nothing is more predictable than collective surprise. The same crowd that once shrugged is now furious. The same system that called it necessary is now calling it regrettable. Apparently, hindsight is not just 20/20, it's extremely confident. This isn't a story about chaos. It's about permission, about what was considered acceptable when no one thought it would be examined, and about why what was done to you wasn't just okay in the moment, but quietly agreed upon, until agreement became too embarrassing to defend. That's where this begins. Number one, they approved the damage because it benefited them. What was done to you didn't slip through the cracks. It passed through hands, conversations, and quiet approvals. Someone looked at the harm and decided it was acceptable because it made their life easier. Maybe it protected their position. Maybe it kept the peace. Maybe it avoided paperwork, conflict, or accountability. Whatever the reason, the damage served a purpose. And that purpose mattered more than you at the time. People like to believe harm only happens when someone is cruel. That's comforting, but it's rarely true. Most damage is approved by people who don't see themselves as villains. They see themselves as practical. They tell themselves it's temporary, manageable, or not their responsibility. They convince themselves that you'll be fine because dealing with the problem properly would require effort they don't want to give. There is a strange honesty in how systems work. If something continues, it's because it's useful. Your suffering reduced friction. It kept routine smooth. It allowed others to move forward without slowing down to do the right thing. You became the cost that made their version of order possible. And as long as the benefits outweighed the discomfort of acknowledging you, the approval stayed in place. What makes this hard to swallow is that no dramatic decision was needed. No meeting titled "Let's harm someone," just small permissions stacked on top of each other. A shrug here, a delay there, a choice to look away. Each one felt harmless on its own. Together, they formed a clear answer. This is okay to do to you. The outrage now doesn't erase that truth. It only proves the benefit has expired. Once the harm stopped being useful and started becoming visible, inconvenient, or embarrassing, the approval vanished. Suddenly, it's unacceptable. Suddenly, people are concerned. Not because the damage changed, but because the payoff did. That's the brutal part. Your pain wasn't ignored by accident. It was tolerated because it worked. And understanding that is not meant to harden you. It's meant to free you from the lie that it was ever about misunderstanding. It wasn't. It was about advantage. Number 2, the outrage came late because the community needed proof, not truth. What you shared early on was already enough. The facts didn't change later, and neither did the impact. What changed was how safe it felt for people to agree with you. Truth, on its own, rarely moves a crowd. Proof does, especially the kind that protects people from being singled out or blamed. Until then, your experience stayed in that uncomfortable space where believing you required courage. Most communities don't respond to what is right. They respond to what is undeniable. As long as there was room to doubt, reinterpret, or downplay what happened, people used it. Not because they truly believed you were wrong, but because doubt gave them cover. It allowed them to stay neutral, and neutrality is the most popular position when standing up has consequences. There's also the fear of being early. Being first to speak up means being exposed. It means risking reputation, relationships, and belonging. So people wait. They watch reactions. They count numbers. Once enough voices rise at the same time, outrage becomes safe. Suddenly, it looks like integrity instead of rebellion. That's why the anger feels delayed and performative. It didn't grow naturally from empathy. It arrived after confirmation. Screenshots surfaced. Patterns became obvious. Others spoke up. Now there was evidence heavy enough to carry collective agreement. Only then did people allow themselves to feel angry out loud. What hurts is realizing the community didn't need more truth from you. They needed protection for themselves. Proof isn't about clarity, it's about safety. It lets people say, "I believe you," without admitting they hesitated when it mattered most. This delay doesn't mean your truth was weak. It means the environment was. A strong truth in a weak community will always be postponed until it becomes undeniable. And by the time outrage arrives, it often congratulates itself for showing up, ignoring the fact that it arrived late to something you had already lived through alone. That's the quiet betrayal in delayed outrage. It pretends to be justice while avoiding the responsibility of timing. Number 3, you were used as a testing ground for what people could get away with. What happened to you wasn't random. It wasn't an isolated lapse in judgment. You became the experiment, an unspoken measure of how far people could push limits without consequence. Before anyone else, before the rules were written clearly, before public eyes were watching, they tested the boundaries on you. And they watched closely, taking notes, adjusting their actions based on how you reacted, how far you would tolerate, and what would be ignored. Being the first target isn't flattering. It isn't proof of resilience or importance. It's proof that the system, or the people in it, saw you as expendable. You were the canary in the coal mine. They didn't need your approval, your comfort, or even your understanding. What mattered was your response, because it dictated what could be done to others in the future. What's insidious is how calculated it was. Every small concession, every ignored complaint, every delayed acknowledgement was a data point. They watched to see if your endurance would normalize the harm. They observed if your silence could be interpreted as consent. They measured whether your discomfort would ripple outward or be absorbed quietly. You became a blueprint without being told, and the pattern they learned didn't end with you. The cruel irony is that surviving it doesn't erase its purpose. You weren't chosen because you could handle it. You were chosen because your suffering was invisible enough to be useful. And when systems or people see usefulness in someone's pain, empathy is always secondary. This understanding doesn't make the injustice smaller. It exposes the mechanics behind it. It explains the cold efficiency of the harm. It reveals why accountability felt absent. You weren't alone by accident, you were first. An understanding that truth is terrifying but powerful. It allows you to see the design, to recognize the manipulation, and to stop being a template for what others might try next. You were tested, but you survived the experiment. And surviving the experiment gives you insight that the system never wanted you to have. Number 4, the rules were bent because you weren't seen as protected. The moment someone decided it was okay to let this happen to you, it wasn't about breaking rules. It was about bending them in a way that suited their convenience. You weren't considered someone the rules existed to protect. Not because you didn't deserve it, but because no one around you claimed the responsibility to enforce it. Protection isn't automatic, it's selective, and in your case, you weren't on the list. Rules are often praised as rigid, unyielding, and absolute. In reality, they are elastic, and their elasticity is determined by who benefits when they stretch. People in power, or even just those with the courage to define limits, decide who gets the full weight of protection. You weren't given that. You were the variable, the exception, the one whose well-being could be compromised without demanding consequences for anyone. The rules were there, but only as a suggestion when it came to you. Bending rules doesn't look dramatic at first. It's small decisions, quiet approvals, and subtle dismissals. That's not usually how we do it, muttered in passing, a delay in response, a side glance that avoids full accountability. Each act seems minor, but together they form a clear message. Your protection is optional, negotiable, and inconvenient. What should have been a shield became a sieve. What's worse is how easily this gets rationalized. The people who bend rules for convenience convince themselves that it's fair. They tell themselves you'll survive, adapt, or understand. They forget that rules exist for a reason, to prevent harm, not to measure how much someone can tolerate. When someone isn't seen as protected, the system stops functioning for them. It becomes an obstacle course instead of a safeguard. Recognizing this doesn't make the experience smaller. It explains the cold efficiency behind it. You weren't ignored by accident. The rules weren't broken because of carelessness. They were bent because you were deemed expendable. And that's a truth both cruel and clarifying. Understanding it gives power back to the one who was sidelined. It exposes the gap between what should protect and who gets to be protected. Number 5. Your endurance was mistaken for consent. One of the most insidious things about what happened to you is how your strength was used against you. Every time you endured, every time you stayed silent, every time you absorbed the unfairness without outwardly breaking, the people around you interpreted it as agreement. They didn't see your survival as courage or resilience. They saw it as permission. Your ability to tolerate became their justification. Endurance is often admired, but in the wrong hands, it's weaponized. People around you watched how far you could bend before snapping and then adjusted their actions to fit that threshold. The harder you held on, the more they assumed that their behavior was acceptable. And the quieter you were, the louder the message seemed to them. They can take it. They won't fight back. It's okay. This misreading of strength is what makes the betrayal sting the most. Your capacity to withstand should have been your armor, but it became a tool for them to push boundaries. They didn't have to ask for consent or permission. They believed they had it already. Every boundary you respected, every rule you followed, every attempt to navigate the situation carefully, was twisted into a green light for further intrusion. The tragedy of this is not just that it happened, it's that the world rewarded them for misjudging you. The more you survived, the more their assumptions were reinforced. Your endurance, meant to protect your dignity and self, became evidence in the case for what they could get away with. What was supposed to be a strength was interpreted as weakness. not because of you, but because of their willingness to exploit it. Understanding this changes everything. It reveals why silence was never neutral, why patience was never safe, and why survival alone wasn't enough to stop the harm. Endurance is not consent, and your strength was never an invitation. Recognizing this gives clarity and a quiet, undeniable power. It shows that the fault was never yours, and it shifts the lens from what you tolerated to what they chose to do. Number 6, the community normalized it by calling it necessary. One of the most unsettling parts of what happened to you is how easily it was packaged as something unavoidable. Calling the harm necessary didn't make it right. It made it invisible. Suddenly, the act wasn't a violation or a mistake. It was a requirement, a step in a process, a trade-off everyone had to accept. Words like necessary carry authority, and when repeated enough, they convince people to stop noticing the person who is actually suffering. Normalizing harm this way is more than convenient. It's strategic. By labeling it essential, the people around you created a shield for themselves. They didn't have to wrestle with guilt, accountability, or ethical discomfort. They could nod, follow along, and pretend that what was happening was unavoidable. Your pain became an abstract side effect, a cost that could be rationalized away with phrases that sound responsible but are empty in practice. This normalization also silences the observer. When someone hears necessary, they hesitate to question it. Criticism becomes suspicion. Complaints become overreactions. And anyone who might have defended you now doubts themselves, thinking maybe the harm really was unavoidable. It isolates you in plain sight, because even the people meant to notice you are caught in the spell of justification. What's frightening is how effective this becomes over time. The more people repeat it, the more it sinks into the collective conscience, until no one even remembers a time when it wasn't acceptable. Your experience is reframed as part of a system, as part of a plan, rather than as a violation of trust or fairness. The harm stops being an anomaly and starts being a rule. Recognizing this is crucial. It exposes the cold mechanics behind what feels like chaos. You weren't overlooked because people didn't care. You were framed as a step in a process that supposedly couldn't stop. The label necessary is a mask, a way for those benefiting from the situation to avoid scrutiny. Understanding that gives clarity and power. It isn't your fault that they hid behind words, and it isn't your burden to justify the unjustifiable. Number 7. People defended the act to defend their own past silence. One of the most uncomfortable truths about what happened to you is that some of the outrage you see now is not genuine moral clarity, it's self-preservation. People defended the harm, excused it, or minimized it, not because they supported it, but because admitting it was wrong would force them to confront their own past inaction. Your suffering became a mirror reflecting their silence, and mirrors are rarely comfortable to look into. Defending the act was easier than admitting they did nothing. It required less courage, less reflection, and certainly less risk. They could point fingers, make arguments, and create justifications, all while keeping themselves on the safe side of their own conscience. By defending what was done to you, they convinced themselves that inaction in the past was acceptable, or at least forgivable. Their loyalty was to their own reputation, not to truth or justice. This behavior isn't just cowardice, it's a protective mechanism. Silence carries weight. Once someone acknowledges it, they can't undo the fact that they were absent when presence was needed. Defending the harm is a way to erase that discomfort, to rewrite history in real time. And because people rarely want to see themselves as complicit, they manufacture narratives where your suffering becomes a necessary event, a misunderstanding, or even something you somehow brought upon yourself. What makes this particularly insidious is how persuasive it can feel to outsiders. When people rationalize harm to protect their past choices, their arguments often sound reasonable. They use logic, statistics, or appeals to process, masking moral failure as practical observation. And anyone not intimately familiar with the context may unknowingly absorb these defenses as truth. Understanding this reveals a painful but liberating fact. Some defenses are never about you. They're about protecting someone else's ego, reputation, or sense of morality. Recognizing that allows you to separate the harm from the excuses, the injustice from the justifications. It shows that while people may claim to defend the act, their defense was never truly about fairness or decency. It was about saving themselves from the reflection your pain forced them to face. Number 8, you became inconvenient once the truth started making noise. There's a cruel turning point in situations like yours, and it's rarely recognized for what it is. At first you were invisible, ignored, overlooked, or quietly tolerated because acknowledging you was unnecessary. Your presence, your struggle, your voice didn't interfere with anyone's comfort or routine. You existed on the margins, easily contained. But once the truth you carried began to demand attention, to challenge the calm order of things, you shifted from being irrelevant to inconvenient. Inconvenience is a powerful force in human behavior. Systems, groups, and even individuals are remarkably tolerant of harm as long as it doesn't disturb their stability. Once your experience became undeniable, once it started attracting attention, asking for acknowledgement, or demanding change, it disrupted their carefully maintained equilibrium. Suddenly, the same people who ignored or tolerated the harm found it threatening. Your truth made them uncomfortable, and discomfort triggers defense mechanisms faster than logic ever could. This is why backlash often feels disproportionate. It's not just about the original act, it's about the exposure of silence, the revelation that their convenience came at your expense. Your voice illuminated cracks in the structure they relied on to feel safe, competent, or righteous. That exposure is never welcomed gracefully. Instead, you become the problem, the loud variable that must be managed, diminished, or dismissed. The harsh reality is that visibility is dangerous for those who benefit from the status quo. They don't fight the harm itself, they fight the awareness of it. And in that fight, your inconvenience is weaponized against you. Arguments, rationalizations, and sudden outrage from others often target you rather than the injustice, because redirecting the focus is easier than confronting uncomfortable truths about complicity. Understanding this dynamic is both infuriating and liberating. It clarifies why attention brings resistance, why speaking up provokes backlash, and why survival in silence never guaranteed fairness. You weren't inconvenient for being strong or resilient. You became inconvenient because your truth demanded recognition in a space designed to ignore it. And recognizing that changes the entire story. The problem was never you. It was their unwillingness to face reality. Number 9. The system didn't fail. You simply weren't included in who it protects. It's easy to blame bureaucracy, policies, or vague failures when harm happens, but that's a comforting lie. The truth is harsher. The system worked exactly as it was designed. It just wasn't designed to protect you. You weren't a priority, and that absence wasn't an accident. The protections, rules, and safeguards existed for others, the ones deemed worthy, visible, or convenient. You were simply outside that circle. Systems aren't neutral. They operate on invisible hierarchies of value, assigning protection, attention, and care to those who are already considered important. When you fell outside that hierarchy, harm didn't need to break rules. It didn't even need to bend them. Your vulnerability was predictable, because no one ever built the system to anticipate, defend, or shield someone like you. And because the system functions within its design, your suffering didn't trigger alarms. It triggered indifference. This doesn't mean the people within the system were all cruel, though some certainly were. Many followed protocol, signed papers, or nodded in meetings, believing they were doing the right thing. The problem wasn't negligence. It was selective design. You were excluded before anything even happened. Your experience wasn't an oversight. It was a gap the system assumed would never matter. Recognizing this gives clarity about why outrage often feels performative. When the system fails, it's not a glitch. It's a reflection of who was considered worth defending. That realization is jarring because it removes the comforting idea that fairness is automatic. Fairness only exists where it was planned. Where it wasn't, survival falls entirely on the individual. Understanding this doesn't excuse the harm, it illuminates it. You weren't ignored because people forgot you existed. You were ignored because the entire structure was indifferent to your presence. And once you see that, you can separate the personal betrayal from the systemic design. It wasn't random. It wasn't personal in the conventional sense. It was a cold calculation of inclusion and exclusion, and you were placed outside the circle from the start. Number 10. Your pain was minimized because it challenged a familiar order. What happened to you wasn't just ignored. It was actively downplayed, diluted and reframed, because acknowledging it would disrupt the comfortable reality people had built around them. Your pain was inconvenient. It didn't fit the narrative they wanted to believe, the system they wanted to protect, or the routines they were invested in. So, instead of facing it, they minimized it. They told themselves it wasn't as bad as it seemed, that it was overstated, or that it was somehow your fault. Anything to maintain the order they depended on. Minimization is subtle but powerful. It doesn't require anyone to be openly malicious. It only requires a commitment to stability over truth. Your experience challenged the assumptions, habits, and hierarchies people relied on to feel safe, competent, or superior. If they admitted your pain fully, they would have to admit the system's flaws, their own inaction, and the moral compromises they tolerated. That's heavy work. Minimizing your suffering became the shortcut, the easy way to preserve their world while leaving you to navigate the chaos alone. This is why explanations often sound like excuses. They disguise avoidance as reason. Words like not intentional, it happens, or we didn't realize act as buffers, keeping attention away from the real issue. Your discomfort threatened the balance of power and perception. Your reality didn't fit the story they needed to maintain, so they reshaped it. The dangerous part of this minimization is how it reshapes your own perception. When the people around you act as if your pain is small, it can make you question your own experience. But clarity comes when you recognize the pattern. The minimization wasn't about you. It was about protecting a familiar order. The world doesn't always react to truth. It reacts to threat. And your pain was a threat to the equilibrium they had carefully constructed. Understanding this reframes the injustice. It wasn't that no one cared. It was that your suffering was inconvenient to the narrative they wanted to preserve. Recognizing that truth gives power, it separates the weight of your experience from the attempts to erase it and shows why what you felt mattered, even when no one else acted like it did. Number 11. Accountability threatened more people than the harm itself. What happened to you was uncomfortable for those involved, but the ripple effect of accountability would have been far worse for them than the act itself. The moment someone faces the consequences of their actions, it doesn't just touch them. It touches everyone who watched, who knew, or who could have intervened. Your suffering exposed not just a mistake, but a network of decisions, silences, and compromises. Holding anyone responsible would have unraveled more than the original harm. It would have revealed complicity, negligence, and fear that people had carefully hidden. That's why accountability is often delayed, diluted, or avoided entirely. It's easier to justify, explain away, or ignore harm than it is to confront the consequences. Admitting fault would force people to re-examine their choices, their loyalties, and their own past inaction. It threatens reputations, relationships, and stability. The truth becomes dangerous, not because of what happened, but because of what it uncovers about those who stood by silently. People are rarely cruel for cruelty's sake. They are strategic. They know accountability isn't just punishment, it's exposure. And exposure is uncomfortable, inconvenient, and risky. So rather than facing it head-on, they let harm continue or minimize it, keeping the uncomfortable truth buried under a layer of politeness, rules, or rationalizations. Your pain becomes manageable only because confronting it fully would disrupt too many people. Understanding this flips the narrative. The problem was never only the act itself, it was everyone who allowed it to happen because facing it was too threatening. That's why outrage often comes late, why justice can feel performative, and why apologies often appear after the damage is visible to everyone else. It wasn't just your suffering on trial, it was the exposure of everyone who had chosen convenience over courage. Recognizing this gives you clarity. It shows that the weight of responsibility was always a threat to others, not to you. You weren't ignored because your experience was insignificant. You were ignored because truth and accountability were too threatening to the people who needed the system and themselves to appear intact. And that understanding is both infuriating and empowering. Number 12, they expected you to break quietly, not stand intact. From the very beginning, the people who allowed what happened to you assumed you would crumble under pressure. They believed that fear, confusion, or exhaustion would eventually silence you. Every step of the way, their actions were designed with that expectation in mind. Rules were bent, words were twisted, and small injustices were layered together, all under the assumption that you would eventually bend or break. They underestimated your strength, resilience, and refusal to let their convenience dictate your reality. This expectation shaped how they acted. They weren't just careless or indifferent, they were strategic. Every delay, every excuse, every subtle dismissal was meant to wear you down, to normalize the impossible, and to make survival feel like surrender. They assumed that persistence would lead to compliance, that endurance would become consent. And when you didn't comply, when you stood firm, it disrupted their entire plan. Your resilience wasn't just inconvenient, it was disorienting. The audacity of expecting someone to break quietly lies in the control it seeks. They rely on invisibility, on the hope that the harmed person will manage their suffering in isolation. That expectation allows them to operate without scrutiny, to maintain their routines, and to protect themselves from accountability. But your refusal to collapse exposed the lie. The system wasn't neutral, the harm wasn't minor, and your strength wasn't going to be taken for granted. Standing intact forces a reckoning. It forces the world to acknowledge what they hoped you wouldn't. It challenges assumptions, disrupts order, and unsettles those who relied on your silence as a form of permission. Your survival in full awareness doesn't just protect you. It reveals the extent of their calculations, the limits of their moral courage, and the gap between expectation and reality. Understanding this reframes the narrative of your experience. You weren't just enduring harm, you were defying an entire set of assumptions built against you. Their expectation of your quiet collapse was a measure of their convenience, not your weakness. By standing intact, you proved that the system, the people, and their plans underestimated one crucial factor: your refusal to be broken. Number 13. The outrage exists Because your experience exposed a pattern. What people see as shock, anger, or sudden indignation isn't really about the moment that affected you. It's about the larger pattern your experience revealed. When harm occurs quietly, it's easy for others to dismiss it as an isolated mistake, an unfortunate incident, or bad luck. But when someone like you speaks up, endures, and refuses to be silenced, the ripple it creates uncovers a truth that can no longer be ignored. This isn't random. This happens repeatedly, systematically, and with a quiet approval that most people overlook. The outrage isn't generated by empathy alone. It's triggered by realization. Your story shines a light on behaviors, decisions, and structural flaws that were always there, hiding in plain sight. Once people notice the pattern, the conversation shifts. The discussion stops being about a single event and becomes about a system that allowed it, tolerated it, and even enabled it. That's uncomfortable for those involved, because patterns can't be excused as easily as accidents. Patterns demand accountability, reflection, and most of all, action. This is why delayed outrage often feels intense but contradictory. People suddenly appear enraged, not because they didn't care before, but because your experience validated what they either suspected or feared. Your survival, your voice, and your refusal to accept injustice brought a truth that others were avoiding. The harm itself becomes secondary to the exposure of the recurring behavior. Patterns are terrifying because they reveal predictability. They show that what happened to you could happen to someone else, and perhaps has. That is the core of why the outrage now exists. It isn't just about your story, it's about the repeated failures, the silences, and the choices that allowed harm to continue unchecked. Recognizing this reframes the power of your experience. You didn't just endure an isolated act, you revealed a consistent flaw that demanded attention. Your truth became evidence, your survival a catalyst, and your presence a spotlight on the repeated injustices that no one wanted to see until they could no longer pretend they didn't exist. Number 14. What was done to you was allowed, because stopping it required courage they didn't have. At the heart of what happened lies a truth that's uncomfortable but undeniable. Your suffering continued because the people around you lacked the courage to act. It wasn't about ignorance, misunderstanding, or even malice in most cases. It was about the quiet, calculated decision to do nothing. Doing the right thing would have meant standing up, speaking out, or intervening. And that demands courage. Courage is costly, uncomfortable, and risky. For many, avoiding it was far easier than facing the consequences of integrity. The absence of courage isn't always dramatic. It shows up in small choices that accumulate over time. A delayed response, a shrug, a half-hearted defense, or the decision to prioritize convenience over justice. Each act of inaction silently whispered that harm was acceptable. The people around you weren't forced to tolerate wrongdoing. They chose it, because standing against it meant challenging themselves, their peers, or the system itself. What makes this realization striking is how it reframes accountability. The failure wasn't only in what was done, it was in what wasn't done. Couragelessness allowed harm to continue unchecked. It gave permission to acts that should have been stopped immediately. The brave few who might have intervened were drowned out by the hesitant many who preferred safety over morality. And in that silence, your experience became negotiable, optional, and ultimately tolerated. Recognizing this is both infuriating and empowering. It shows that the obstacle wasn't your weakness, it was their fear. Their inability to act doesn't diminish the wrong that occurred, but it illuminates the mechanics behind it. The truth is brutally simple. Harm persisted not because it was inevitable, but because courage was absent. Understanding this gives perspective. It explains why injustice often continues quietly in plain sight. And it shows that your survival, your voice, and your refusal to accept what was happening is the real measure of strength. You endured not because anyone protected you, but because you stood where others refused to stand. And that is the undeniable power that they lacked. Everything we've explored here exposes a truth most people avoid. What was done to you wasn't random, and your experience wasn't insignificant. It wasn't a mistake, an accident, or a simple oversight. It was a reflection of choices, calculations, and the quiet compromises of those around you. From the subtle approvals that benefited others, to the false assurances that harm was necessary, to the courage they lacked, every piece of what happened was part of a system that underestimated your strength and resilience. Yet through it all, you survived. You endured when others expected you to break. You spoke when silence was easier, and you revealed a pattern that no one could ignore. This story isn't just about injustice, it's about clarity. It's about seeing the mechanics behind harm, recognizing the selective protections of the world, and understanding how endurance, truth, and courage interact to expose what many would rather hide. You weren't invisible. You were underestimated. You weren't weak. You were defiant. And the outrage that follows, the questions that are finally being asked, are a reflection not of your fault, but of the failure and fear of those who allowed it to happen. Your experience becomes a lens through which others can see the system for what it really is, a spark that forces reflection, and a reminder that survival and truth are more powerful than the convenience of silence. Every moment you stood strong, every act of resilience, and every truth you voiced dismantles the assumptions that tried to contain you. It's proof that strength isn't always visible, but it's undeniable. If this message resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with anyone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below with your thoughts or experiences, because your voice matters, and together we shine a light on what others want to keep hidden. Don't let this truth be ignored. Let it be heard. Stay blessed always.